Moon Knight Episode 1 has released, and I gotta say, I enjoyed it. First off, I really like the character of Steven. He is a very likable character that you can tell is unhappy and lonely, but he always tries to put on a positive outlook on things, and you just can't help but like the guy.
Honey, I'm home. Oh, I forgot I'm not married.
He is a genuinely nice character, and judging by the first episode, I gotta say, Steven is the best new MCU character I've seen for a very long time. And Oscar Isaac does a great job portraying him too, and he even does a great job with the accent. Ethan Hawke is the villain, and we don't see much of him, but as of right now, he's kind of boring and generic to me. So I hope they work on him in the upcoming episodes. I gotta say, this is probably the best pilot to an MCU show, and it's really nice to see an MCU property that does not constantly try to connect itself and make references to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's telling its own story, and I really like that. It is the first MCU property that stands on its own, so far at least. And the action scenes were cool. Nothing great, but they had a bit of uniqueness here and there, which I liked. And I like how you are just as confused about what's going on as Steven is. And you can see that one of his personalities knows how to brutally fight. And I really hope that we get to see his brutal fighting style on screen in the upcoming episodes. Also, when it's night or dark, the show looks really good and does look different from the rest of the MCU movies and shows. When in daylight, however, the cinematography and colors look flat like a generic looking MCU film. I also thought that there was something very off with this episode's build-up. Now the setup with Steven and his character development is fine, and the humor is actually pretty good most of the time, but there were several scenes in this episode that didn't have the proper build-up. This awkward reaction, for example, felt like it escalated very quickly. I feel like he needed to have done something really strange for this woman to act the way she did, but he didn't, and it made the joke feel like an overreaction to me. But the main problem I have with the build-up is the horror throughout this episode. Horror needs slow and quiet moments to build up tension, and then the scare comes into play. But the horror in this episode just happens, and there's no build-up at all. And you can tell that Marvel are trying to incorporate horror, but it's clear that they don't know how to do it. I mean, the Batman had horror, and it was much more effective, such as the opening serial killer scene with the Riddler. It had the perfect amount of build-up, and the way the TV's light was reflecting off of the Riddler's glasses, and you were constantly on the edge of your seat waiting for him to strike, that's what the proper amount of build-up does to a horror scene. It makes you dread the payoff. But none of the horror in the first episode of Moon Knight felt anywhere near as skillfully crafted as the horror in the Batman. And this show is dealing with supernatural horror, so it should be scarier. But the horror stuff just happens very quickly, and this thing is not particularly frightening. And before you see it in the horror scenes, you hear its voice. And the voice sounds very kiddie or very goofy. It honestly reminded me of a more goofier version of Tom Hardy's Venom voice.
Go back to sleep, worm. You're not supposed to be here. The idiot's in control. No, the idiot's back.
So when you hear that goofy voice and then see this thing haunting Steven, it takes what's left of its scare factor away. They needed to give it a more haunting and demonic voice, but the voice it has sounds more like Aslan from The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, and that's not frightening. And the horror music was good, but I feel like they hilariously overused it in this one scene where a more subtle music would have worked better. Also, the CGI in this show is terrible. Again, Marvel are not even crashing real cars anymore like they used to, and the werewolf looks so fake it's unbelievable. And there is some obvious green screen going on here too. I mean, this has a big Disney budget, and meanwhile, Netflix has much more real looking monsters in The Witcher. Also, we don't see any violence in this episode of Moon Knight. We see the aftermaths, which shows us some blood on Steven's hands after he blacks out, but we never see any actual violence, so I'm hoping we see more in the upcoming episodes. Also, this scene with the glass felt like the scene in the opening of Doctor Strange when a guard has his head cut off. It happens, but it feels forced just for Marvel to act edgy for one scene. It doesn't feel organically dark though. So I like a lot of the stuff that they are trying to do in this episode, especially with their attempts at incorporating horror, and they definitely get my respect for that, but this feels like horror from an inexperienced horror director. And having just recently seen the horror in the Batman, and some surprisingly pretty decent horror scenes in some Morbius clips, I feel like Moon Knight is the least skillfully crafted when it comes to incorporating its horror. And on top of that, it keeps switching between tones so rapidly that the horror vibe doesn't really sit with you. And Moon Knight's reveal in the end felt underwhelming to me. I really think they should should have built him up even more and maybe had Steven get some kind of injury, but instead, Moon Knight showed up too quickly and it just didn't seem as cool as it should have been. I honestly think that Moon Knight's reveal is one of the things I will remember the least about this episode. I gotta admit though, the more times I watch this scene by itself, it keeps getting a little cooler each time. I just wish it gave me that impact on my first viewing. So yeah, I have problems, but I do like that this show feels more different from the other MCU properties. Now don't get me wrong, there are plenty of scenes where it still does feel like an MCU show, they haven't completely separated it, but for now, they have separated it enough that I am liking what I see. I really do like this episode and I am genuinely interested to see where the show goes next, and I actually came out quite happy when I finished watching this episode, so I'm delightfully surprised and I'm eager to see more, and this episode gets a good 7 out of 10. Also, it's worth pointing out that we only see Moon Knight at the very end, so I can't comment on him as a superhero yet. But regardless, I know Moon Knight has multiple different personalities, but I really hope that they make Steven the heart of the show, and I hope he gets some good development as the season goes on too, and I really hope they don't turn him into an MCU comic relief. So yeah, comment below with your thoughts on Moon Knight and let me know what you thought of it. And what did you think of the horror in the first episode? Be sure to let me know. Thanks very much as always for watching guys, I really do appreciate it. And I will see all of you very soon. Take care.